So today we gathered, we as a department, we identified that many of our students would like to, at least they express an interest in continuing, furthering their education by going to grad school, but we also kind of like determined that a lot of students don't know how to go about that. And pretty much, not pretty much, but really everybody on this panel here, we have gone through that process. We applied to grad school and we kind of like successfully finished that. It's a process, and it takes many steps, and I remember at the beginning of my process, I was very confused, and I had no idea how to do a lot of things, and now in hindsight, I realized that I could have avoided many, many problems that I encountered. So that's the reason why we decided to put together this panel. A lot of you guys expressed an interest in going to grad school, but you also have some questions, I'm assuming. So my name is, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Stana. I'm the assistant professor. I'm an assistant professor and the assistant chair of the Department of Communication, Languages, and Cultures. I've been here, this is my 6th year. I got my master's degree in communication at the University of Hartford in 2007, and then my PhD at Bowling Green State University in 2013. So it's fairly recent. I still remember painfully many things that happened during that time.
We're just introducing ourselves, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Dr. Alana Miller, I think some of you know me.
Yeah.
My background is I have a BA in journalism with a concentration in print and government and politics. My MA, my master's degree, is from Syracuse University. That's in television, radio, and film, and the specialization, which is kind of loose, is in screenwriting. And then my PhD is from Temple University, and it's in, I think they call the degree Media and Communication now. They've changed the name of it. So that's my background.
I'm Tim Buckner. I'm not really a doctor because I don't fix people, but I'm a professor as well. Sorry, it's just I don't enjoy the FSU culture of everyone being doctors because we don't really operate on anyone.
Yeah.
But I'm not a professor of communication, but I'm a professor of Spanish. I learned Spanish in Peru. I'm not a native speaker of Spanish, and so I had to learn the language first, and then I came back to the States after 2 years in Peru, and I studied in the university and realized that with my BA in Spanish, there were not as many options as I thought, until my professors explained that I could go and I could start teaching Spanish while I was doing my master's degree and get paid. I was like, oh, cool, I can get a job and I can keep learning Spanish, which I liked doing. I've always been just loved to learn. And so I went to Texas Tech in Lubbock, Texas, and I finished the master's degree in 2 years, and then 4 years later, I finished my PhD. And then, thankfully, Fayetteville State hired me here. So I've been here about the same time as Dr. Stana.
All right, I'm Shawn Sweeney, for those of you who don't know me. I am the only one up here who does not have their PhD, because I have an MFA, so Master of Fine Arts, and that's the terminal degree for my field, which is the actual production in video. My bachelor's in science is in digital media production, which I received in 2008, and then in 2011 I got my master's in film producing. So I focused more on that end of the spectrum, and I did that in California at the Academy of Art University in San Francisco.
Right. So a little bit about, I think we're going to kind of like take turns now and talk for a few minutes. One thing that, so again, a lot of students express an interest in going to grad school. But they don't know very many things about it. So I think a few things that are important to know before you start this process is, it's a process, it takes time. We're kind of like towards the end of December, and a lot of graduate schools, both at master's and doctoral level, they expect the applications to be in at some point in December or maybe January, if I'm not mistaken, at least in our field in communication. You need a little bit of time. I'm not saying that if you start applying now, if you start putting together your application now, you don't have enough time, but it would be tight, okay? Most schools require their applicants to have taken the GRE, the Graduate Record Examination, I think that's called. It's not a very difficult exam. I failed it miserably the first time when I took it. I didn't fail it. You can't fail it, but you get a score, and my first score was just was terrible. And then I put in some time and effort, and I'm not incredibly good at math, and English is not my native language. But so with a little bit of time and effort, second time I took the GRE, I did much better. So you need a GRE, you need a letter of application, which at least I couldn't write it down in one sitting. It took me a few weeks, maybe a month to write it properly, right? When you write such a letter, it's probably a good idea to ask from us, your professors, feedback. Give us a draft, and at least myself, I would be more than happy to return it to you with comments and suggestions. You need letters of recommendation. Most schools that I'm aware of, they require 3. One thing that I've noticed about students is that you have to understand that these are letters of recommendation. These are earned. So you have to go to professors that you worked with before, professors who know you, right? So they can speak to your I don't know, intellectual curiosity, ability to write, things of that nature. You want, when I write a letter of recommendation, it's at least 1 page, probably more, and I'm referring to, again, writing ability, intellectual curiosity, things of that. So I would have to know the person. So what I'm trying to say is, when you ask for these letters, go to people who know you, right? Go to professors in whose classes you did well. That would be probably ideal. So that's kind of like my short spiel. It's a process, right? So you would have to plan accordingly and to realize that it involves a little bit of time. In my case, I think it took me about I don't know, 3 or 4 months, something like this, to put together an application that was ultimately successful. I'm not going to take up too much time, but maybe my colleagues can talk a little bit about. A lot of students don't want to go to grad school because they think it's incredibly expensive, and it can be. But most schools offer assistantships. But maybe my colleagues can talk about that a little bit.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
My first advice to you guys on grad school is I am not a model. I went to grad school because I realized I didn't want to do my bachelor's degree. And then I went to a master's degree and then realized I didn't want to do that either. So my first advice to any student who's considering graduate school is do your research. So start even before you start thinking about GREs, before you start, start researching programs. Different programs are going to offer you different things. And depending on what you do, you want to really target where you're going to go. So for example, I often have students who come to me and they want to do journalism as a master's degree. And I'm like, that's great, perfect. Find a program that specializes in something you don't already know what to do. If you have taken the introductory journalism classes with me, you don't need to do print journalism as a master's degree. I'm just gonna tell you that. You can pick that stuff up in the newsroom. You are fine. But if you wanna go into broadcast, I would consider going to a school that specializes in broadcast. I can recommend some to you. Maryland has an excellent broadcast journalism program still. And I know that's my alma mater, but I still think that they do a great job there. Other specializations you might wanna consider for journalism. Data analysis, they really want people who can do data analysis these days. Coding and computer stuff, computer stuff. You can tell I'm an expert in that. Investigative journalism, there are now places that specialize in that, and documentary journalism. So figure out what they specialize in. Science journalism, there's definitely a subset there. MIT has a great program. So if you want to do journalism, that's a good idea. If you want to do entertainment, I would consider what places have to offer as well. It depends on what you want to do in entertainment again. Different schools specialize in different things. I was at Syracuse. They specialize more in television than in filmmaking. So what they had was a great multicam studio, so a lot of people got a pretty good television production background there. Not so much of a film production background there. The great thing about a good communication school for a graduate degree, though, is the alumni network. So you want to go someplace, especially if you're going into the entertainment industry. You want to go someplace which has a pretty good alumni network. So this isn't just having high profile alumni, it has ability to connect you with those alums as well as networks within the industry. So for example, Syracuse, it's really overpriced. I'm gonna go ahead and say that. Sorry, I know this is being recorded. I shouldn't say that. It's very expensive, but Syracuse is great. Why? Because they have a really powerful alumni network. I am still on the listserv for the LA Syracuse Alumni Network. Daily jobs get posted, daily. So something you want to pay attention to, and as you're researching schools, I highly recommend you visit, and I highly recommend that you ask about alumni networks. Now, if you want to do something a little more academic, that's a different focus. So look into what people specialize in is the best advice I have. I do want to talk about the GRE just briefly.
Yeah.
I also did poorly on the GRE. Please do not be afraid of the GRE. I did great on the language portion. I did horrible on the math portion. Comm schools don't care. I never even retook it. I just kind of took my bad score and they were like, that's fine. So I'm going to second everything he said about recommendation letters. The earlier you apply, the more likely you are to get assistantships. If you really want to go though, I am kind of a poster child for going anyway. Both of the times, my master's degree and my PhD, they did not offer me any assistance when I first went, and they found money for me. So good programs will also do that for you. They will find money for you. So that's also something to ask about. Again, there's no substitute for visiting these places and talking to professors, or at least emailing them, and they're usually pretty open to talking to you about the program. I feel like I've talked on too long.
No. I think you're saying great
Okay,
things.
I'm gonna pass it along to someone else.
Yeah.
Well, I know all of you are communication majors, so my particular experience doesn't necessarily help, other than the fact that I fought for scholarships on top of my assistantship. I was given a TA position to be able to teach, which I don't know if it happened in your case, which dropped my out-of-state tuition to in-state tuition. So rather than paying like $10,000 a semester, I paid $1,000 a semester. So for my first year, because I was working for the university at Texas Tech, that's something to check when you're doing your research, is to find out, even though you may not be, if you choose a school outside of the state, they're obviously going to want to charge you out-of-state tuition.
Right.
But often they give you benefits for working for them if you get that early assistantship. But towards the end of my master's degree, I forced my way into, and I asked for professors for help to get a fellowship. So on top of teaching, I ended up with a fellowship which paid my tuition. And so if you look for opportunities, there are lots of people that are willing to give money for you to get your education. So if you just look into the opportunities and find out what fits for you and what you're trying to do, that can also help you. One thing that worked for me in languages as well is we would, in the summers, we could take courses, but we could teach twice as much. And so I could work full time in the summer, save up money, take classes towards my degree, and then apply that money, save that money for the fall when I needed to pay my tuition bill.
Excellent.
I don't know, something else unique about languages is I was able to go and take a group of students on a study abroad trip when I was a graduate student. And that's something probably unique to languages.
Yeah,
I don't know that
possibly.
necessarily
Very
the communication field would do that, but you never know. There may be a unique school that has some kind of, I don't know, film study, maybe just trips or something. I don't know. Maybe Shawn can help us more with that. But don't be afraid.
Yeah.
You're the one that knows. You're finishing your degree now, and you have to show your own self-confidence in yourself. I don't know if any of my colleagues feel as I do. Sometimes I struggle to express what I do well, but that's something you have to learn and practice to do.
Yeah.
Get a group of students together, or get if you're with a student organization, practice interviewing, because part of the process of getting into grad school, I had to talk on the phone with people.
Yeah.
People that I didn't know, and they asked me questions about things that I had studied because they wanted to double check that I was a good candidate for their program and not just on paper decent student. So that's something to think about as well. Practicing always helps a lot. That way when you get in a situation and you have to be in front of students, if you're helping TA or to teach, then you remember you're the one with the knowledge and not the ones staring back at you?
Just to kind of go off a little bit of what everybody said, communication schools, they really don't care too much about the GREs. The one that I went to didn't even require GRE scores, so it wasn't even a part of my application process. I always, like they said, schedule a trip, go look at the campus. I went to an open house to the Academy of Art. I got to meet some of the teachers. I got to speak with them. I got to kind of know who was going to, teach there. And that's another big thing too, not just alum, but who's teaching you. Like one of my teachers, he was the production designer for ER. He built the hospital that ER filmed in, for 15 years. My producing teacher produced Airwolf, an 80s TV show. Another one of my producer friends, worked on the full run of Miami Vice. So they were all, big in the 80s and the early 90s, but they knew what they were talking about and they kind of knew. And it's like, I wanted to learn from them. So that was a huge part of it too. When it comes to finding assistantships, I definitely suggest going that route. Try to find places that will help. Do not get buried in student loans. It's something that can happen.
Yep.
I have quite a substantial amount myself because that was, part of the mistakes that I made throughout the process. But that's something that you should really avoid, is trying to basically take out as few student loans as possible, because they are just a huge hindrance, and that's not something you should be worried about while you're trying to find, where you're going. And always try to find a good support group, of mentors and everything. I remember when I was in my undergrad trying to find guidance for grad school or employment, and one of my instructors looked at me dead in the face and said, "Why do you care about a job if you're going to grad school?" So you should always try to keep your options open too. Like don't just be dead set, this is what I'm going to do. If you have a good job in the industry right off the bat, try to jump at that if you can.
Just like my colleagues were saying, it's incredible how many resources are available just kind of like waiting for you. One former student, I think she graduated, Joy, I don't know if you've had her she went to a conference. She wrote a paper in, I think, Dr. Almeida's class, and she went to Southern Communication Association, Southern, I don't know what they call it, right. And she presented the paper there, and she was amazed because many graduate schools were present there trying to attract students, right? And they were offering assistantships and scholarships and this and that. And she came back and she gave a talk in one of my classes, and she was amazed, but you have to reach out to these people. As my colleagues were saying, it's very, very important to put a face next to her application. So when I applied for my PhD program, I was living in Connecticut and I did my PhD in Ohio. About 12 hours of driving between these two places. And so I hopped in the car and I drove for 12 hours just to meet with this guy who subsequently became my advisor. And he did appreciate that I spent 24 hours in the car just to go there to say, and I met with him maybe for an hour. But then when I submitted my application, he supported my application and he fought for me to get an assistantship as well. So I got the full, the full ride. I was teaching a couple of classes and I was helping this guy, my advisor, Dr. Mulcode, with his research, and I didn't pay anything in tuition, right? And that's the case in most schools. They give you a full ride if you qualify for an assistantship. They give you health care or health insurance. They don't?
Temple didn't.
Oh, I'm so
you had to
sorry.
buy it from Temple, and I couldn't
I'm
afford
so
it,
sorry.
so I did
Can I
not.
piggyback off of you real quick?
Yeah, sure, right.
So when I was finishing up my master's, I was kind of looking at going in for a PhD as well.
Right.
And I looked at the University of Texas.
Mhm.
And so like I said before, for production itself, the MFA is the terminal side of it, but film theory, you can go all the way through the PhD. And so I went and I took a tour down in Austin. I took a tour of the campus. I met with everyone, and I did not get into the program, but they even said because I showed up and I met with them and they put a name to a face, I went to the front of the line. They reviewed my stuff first. There was only 8 openings and 125 candidates,
Right.
so they kind of went with people that were already in that track and not somebody that was trying to cross over like myself. But at least it let me know a lot sooner. Instead of waiting that 6 months to get that rejection letter, I was notified a month later, hey, you know, thank you, but, you know, so it still kind of helps you and leaves your door open to go look at other places too, just by taking that extra step and effort.
Yeah, they absolutely appreciate seeing people making that effort, right? This is me, this is who I am, show up with, I don't know, maybe some work that you produced. It's gonna help tremendously when they decide who they let in and who they let in a lot of students, but I think the question is, do they give you that assistantship, which like as Professor Sweeney was saying, I have student loans myself and they're awful.
Yeah, can I piggyback on the student loan
Right.
various discussions? In your calculations when you're deciding on grad school, factor in location, cost of living.
Yeah.
Especially if you're thinking about student loans and stuff. I was able to live quite cheaply in upstate New York, not so much in Philadelphia. So a lot of my student loans that I took out for my PhD were actually to support my being able to like eat and stuff.
Yeah.
So even though I had an assistantship, I got student loans in my PhD because the cost of living was so high. That being said, the flip side of that, location matters also for being in the industry. So places like, obviously like NYU, places like USC, they have a huge advantage because they are especially in the film industry, they're the focal points. Again, with this, reputation matters when it comes even for the entertainment industry. When I worked at Columbia Pictures, people were able to get interviews, or I should say, they were able to get meetings and sit downs with executives just because they went to USC. Like a professor made a call and they got a meeting, and I was like, that is upsetting. But yeah, so reputation matters, and so it's good to also be aware of the reputation of various universities, especially in communication. There are certain communication schools that have really good reputations, so you might want to look into that as well.
Because there's the old adage, you know, it's who you know, but in our industry, it's more of who knows you than anything else.
Yeah, so frequently the other thing is expected in the entertainment industry, as opposed to like, here are my references. Your references are expected to make calls on your behalf, like actively contact the employer. So it's a kind of a different thing than applying to other jobs. But
question. Well, first I'm meeting the three of you, which is very much kind of like, I mean, there's still because I'm in the communication department, but somehow I don't know the
That's
three
fine.
of you. But why doesn't the communication department have scholarships for communication students?
we have a
We do have one scholarship, but it's not it's not gonna pay the tuition for a semester. We award it twice a year, once in spring and once in fall, and I think the total sum is $500. I think it's $500. We're a small department. We don't get a lot of outside donations and things of that nature. So for that reason, we don't have more substantial scholarships. We're trying, but we're not in the same league as these schools that myself and some of my colleagues mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, Syracuse is a private school, and so
Yeah.
they have boatloads of money. So they have 3 communication buildings,
Yeah.
like, period. And a lot of the other state schools that I'm referencing are their flagship schools.
Yeah.
So we don't necessarily have the resources that those schools do. But again, this is something you should keep in mind
Yeah.
if you are looking at grad schools, to what kind of resources and what kind of toys they can
Right.
set you up with.
Most these, so very few schools that I know of, or very few departments of communication offer scholarships for undergraduate degrees. Most of them
That's true.
offer
I-
scholarships for masters and doctoral degrees. We don't have a master's program here in this department, so we're still a very small department.
Yeah, it's more common to get funding in grad school than it
Yeah.
is as an undergrad.
Yeah.
How come this communication department doesn't have like a tour to go to universities, like, like a list of seniors, from the communication part. You have like 10 seniors, and you offer us like, hey, you all want to graduate soon, you are considering, to go for your master's, why we don't like take a trip to go a particular university to see, like what you was talking about, you went up a particular place and you saw like a lot of universities want people.
Right.
How come like this department doesn't offer something like that for us to go to the next university to see some?
Can I ask a question? Do you know of a school that does that?
Yeah. Overseas, where I came from.
Okay. Maybe that's the
Yeah.
difference. Here in the United States, I've never heard of a program from the west to the east coast that takes a group of undergraduate students to go and visit graduate schools. I've never heard of that.
Not that it's not a good idea, but just like my colleague,
Yeah.
Dr. Buckner, I've never heard of that. It may be something that we could look into, but I've never heard of that. Yeah.
I have no experience with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Questions? Yes.
You guys were talking about some the universities that I know, but what about art institutes, more so
No.
for film?
Oh, sorry. The art institute schools themselves, or actual art or communication colleges?
Okay.
No, I meant like which one?
I don't know, like just
Okay,
art
because the art institutes are like their own special schools.
Mhm.
Half of them have been closed down due to lying to students and fraud and everything.
Mm.
So yes, like my undergrad no longer exists. They promised jobs. Like I said, one of my instructors said to me, why do you care about work? You're going to grad school. Like that
Mhm.
was their motto. Like they guaranteed a 97% job placement, and it was like for stuff at the grocery store, the hardware store. It wasn't in the fields.
Right.
So that's why, going to like the Academy of Art, is, a production heavy, college. If you're looking for a specific skill like lighting or editing, I would definitely say, that is a good thing to do, because you're going to spend 3 to 4 years specifically learning every aspect of that craft, which is highly sought after. But for stuff like directing, half the students there are going for directing. Like when I was there for producing, there was 3 of us under that track for producing. So you're competing, with everybody in Hollywood, everybody there, and then you're competing with 300 other directing students, that are there. So if you want to learn a specialty skill, that's definitely good. But yeah, when you said art institutes, I immediately was like, no, like, do not fall into that trap.
Yeah.
Like, because there is one art institute that does do master's classes, and that's the Art Institute of Miami. And just that whole foundation, way back when I first started going there, they were owned by one corporation. They were fine. They got bought out by another company, and then that's when they started going to those shady tactics. And yeah.
Is your question about art schools? in general?
No, I heard about art institutes. Like one tried to get me to register when I was in high school, but I didn't really know much about it because
Mhm.
it wasn't like something like they said that they have no scholarships, but they could pay for housing or something like
Okay.
that. So I didn't understand like what the whole art institute was. It's not like a university where okay, I know
Right.
that this is here. So that's what I was asking.
Oh.
I would be very, very, very cautious when it comes to for-profit colleges and universities. These are, in my opinion, all of them are fraudulent. They are owned by corporations and they have very little to do with the idea of education. Many of them went belly up recently. A good number of for-profit schools just vanished because of shady business practices and things of that nature. They're a lot more expensive than traditional schools, not-for-profit schools. And like I said, in the recent past, many of them disappeared. Trump University is a good example of such a place, right? So they charge a lot of money, and then they disappear, and those degrees are worth nothing. But you're still in that hundreds, not hundreds, but tens of thousands, hundreds,
Yep.
yeah, of dollars. So
To a school
please,
that
please,
doesn't
please,
exist.
whatever you do not go to a for-profit institution. Don't. And please quote me on that. Yeah.
Second me on that. Don't.
Yeah.
I wanted to know about the fellowship you talk about, like the program, fellowship program.
So it was specific to Texas Tech University. They had fellowships. Usually there is a donor that is given to the institution and given parameters for the fellowship. And so what the fellowship covered was, it was basically paid for tuition, and it's kind of pretty related to what Dr. Stano was talking about with his assistantship. They also probably paid for his tuition,
Right.
but this fellowship was an individual that wanted to give back to the institution, gave a certain amount of money that helped fund for a certain amount of time. Just like there are a few scholarships here on campus that would be kind of similar to a fellowship, but I'm afraid I'm a little bit ignorant as far as the distinction between scholarship and fellowship, but I think they're very similar in the sense that they help you with your education. And it was a process that had to be, the fellowship that I wanted was one that had to be, faculty had to nominate students. And so I had to kind of go the back way and talk to a faculty member and say, hey, would you nominate me for this fellowship?
Yeah.
And thankfully it worked out, and it doesn't always work out, because I initially, I remember when I applied to the master's program, I asked for a scholarship or a fellowship, and they said, well, right now we don't have one to offer for you. And so, but if you don't ask, you may be missing out on an opportunity.
There may be other scholarship and fellowship opportunities that are outside of the university as well. For example, a lot of the professional organizations. So I know we have wonderful NABJ people here. NABJ may have some scholarships and fellowships available to help fund your master's degree. Same thing with SPJ, the Society for Professional Journalists. So that's also something to look for, is those like external organizations may have scholarships and fellowships too.
What was the workload like as far as your PhD work? It's an honest question. What's the workload like? What was the class structure like? And then the workload as far as your papers, all the things that I'm sure you loved.
I miss it. I'm not gonna lie. I miss being in class. You guys don't know how fun it is to be in class. I miss being in class. You guys are like, nope.
So for me, like, since I was very production heavy, like every class was production. Like in my audio class, we were in a Foley room the entire day, just smashing things around, making different sounds. We were in, audio recording booths in cinematography. We were filming on 16mm film. We were on editing systems using Avid and Premiere and Final Cut. We were using all of them. And it was all building towards thesis projects. And so throughout these classes, you're kind of building these bonds, and you're like, okay, you're an editor, well, I'm a producer, let me get your information. And then when it came time to about midway through, I had to present my idea for a thesis film to a board of my teachers. And once they approved it, I then, took my 70-page binder and made it a 140-page binder with production scripts, with designs, budgets, casting calls, with everything. And so it took pretty much 3 years to come up with like a $10,000 budget for 2 10-minute films.
So the workload is going to depend on what kind of degree you have. So I always say that my master's was a cakewalk because my undergraduate degree was so hard. But my master's was in television, radio, and film, and it depended on what the program at Syracuse. The television, radio, and film program is kind of their production program. Within the program, you can specialize on different things. You can specialize in business, screenwriting, production, or academics. There were people who did an academic route. And so the production people were doing production things. I was in classes with screenwriting instructors, and so those resembled a writer's room a lot. And actually, Richard Dubin was one of the professors there, and he was fantastic. He did a bunch of sitcoms back in the 80s, and he was kind of amazing. Like Rock. I don't know if anybody remembers Rock. Anyway, doesn't matter. So those resembled writers' rooms, and that was the bulk of my master's work, and then I took a bunch of academic classes. Our final thing for my master's was you got to choose between doing a thesis paper or an internship. I did the internship. Yeah. So, and that's how I got my job at Columbia Pictures briefly. Now for my PhD, that was a totally different thing because that was 100% academic. And so the master's was relatively easy, but the PhD was tough. It was a lot of seminar classes, and the other PhDs on the panel can probably back me up on this, where you're kind of left to explore different ideas, and depending on what the class is on, it's going to have a different feel to it. At the end of your PhD, you're expected to write a dissertation. So I spent 4 years of classes and then 3 years to do the dissertation. And my dissertation took longer. Why? Because I did qualitative, and I had an 8-month field. I had 8 months of field work to do before I even started writing. So it did take me quite some time. But I did have friends that finished their PhD in 4 years, which I cannot believe. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of reading, way more reading than you've ever done in your entire life. And there was a lot of going to sleep, setting my alarm for 5 or 6 hours later, and getting up and finishing things. I always advise people, if you know you're going to do the PhD route, to go straight through, because it's harder to come back. I took 2 years between my master's and my PhD, and I feel like I struggled more than the fellow people who went straight through. That being said, don't feel like you can't. Explore your ideas. There's not one path. And actually, my boyfriend is now doing a master's program after 10 years of being out of school, and he's doing fantastic. I'm bragging about him, but he's doing fantastic.
Nice guy.
He's a nice guy. And he's saying the same things I said in my PhD. It's more reading than I ever did in my entire life. So just keep that in mind if you're going to go to the academic route, that it's a lot of reading, a lot of paper writing, and the workload can be tough. And sometimes it's on top of teaching and doing and helping others with their research as well, which if you have an assistantship, which I did. Sorry if I jumped in.
No, not at all. No, it's so if that's something that you enjoy, and if you want to go that route, the academic route, there's a strong possibility that you enjoy that. It's actually an ideal situation, because especially if you get an assistantship or a fellowship, you basically get paid to read and write, which is nice. Again, if that's what you enjoy doing in life, you make great friends. I went to Bowling Green State University is located in a college town, which Fayetteville is not, right? So that place exists only because the university gets there. So it's surrounded by oceans of cornfields as far as you can see. So there's this oasis there, and I made great friends, people with whom I'm still friends years later, and I'm sure I'm going to be friends with for a long time. So it's not all gloom and doom, but there is a little bit of gloom and doom involved as well. You know, I don't know if I enjoy doing my PhD. It's in the past, and I like thinking about it. It's something that happened in the past. Would I do it again? Probably, but I would be better prepared. It's not a walk in the park, but it's not the end of the world.
It's not.
Yeah, there's some fun to it.
I'm not any smarter than any person anywhere. It's about working hard.
Yes.
A lot of it's about working hard.
Yes. Yep. For many years. Yes. Yes. Yes,
You
please.
mentioned the academic part, but I want to do public speaking, right?
Yeah.
So I know mine may not be more in the academic part, it might be more in the practical, me speaking and stuff.
Right.
Would I still get, like, if I'm pursuing scholarships or
Right.
fellowships to go for, like, if I want to do the public speaking, then, you will hear about going to school for lighting and all these type of stuff, but for public speaking in particular, do you think that?
It's so. Dr. Frobish, who's in
Answering
that
this
booth
question.
there, would be in a much better position, because he's a rhetorician, right? And he would be in a much better position than I believe anybody else on this panel. So maybe you can ask him privately at the end of this. I don't.
We just don't know,
We don't know.
unfortunately.
Right. And rather than giving you false information, I'd rather say I don't know, but Dr. Frobish may be able to help. Yeah. Other questions or comments?
Okay, I have a question. So how did you all handle relocation from, like, say you did your undergrad somewhere kind of close to home, or if you were home, like, in general, other than, like, the cost of living and like bills and having to secure that, like, the actual, like, being in a completely different.
I think I'm.
I was looking at you because you
Yeah.
relocated the farthest.
Right. I don't think I'm the typical situation. I'm originally from Romania, so I moved 7,000 miles away from home to come here. But mine is not the typical experience. So I believe I'm used to that. It's great. Here in the States, I lived in Connecticut, Ohio, and now in North Carolina. I actually like moving around. But I think my colleagues are in a better position.
I mean,
to answer that.
I went away to undergrad, but I was in Maryland, and my dad was in Maryland too, so I could always go to his house and do laundry, and I did frequently. I think it was actually way harder to move to Los Angeles afterwards, but it helps to have a family support system. So if that's part of your calculus in making a choice, I'm not gonna discount that. That's good calculus, because again, it's helpful to have a place to do laundry, right? Yeah. And it's also helpful to have people who can help you move. And also the emotional support. We don't actually talk enough about that.
Yeah,
like
that's
the
correct.
emotional support you need when you're doing grad school. Especially in my PhD, it helped to have other people to talk to and to gripe to. And so having family and friends that are supportive can be very helpful in your education. But are you asking about like the practical, like of money and
No, like
cost?
more so the emotional.
Yeah.
Like how is it like, especially like, I mean, we're all from like North Carolina or in the area, and then we know for our majors and for what our job aspirations would be, we would have to go to the hot areas like New York, California.
Yeah.
Away from the southern comfort that you're
Right.
used to.
Yeah.
So actually, when I graduated Syracuse, because all the professors were like, you have to choose Los Angeles or New York. Literally all of them were like, you have to choose. We formed networks, like friend networks. So when I moved to Los Angeles, I already had a friend network out there that we like hung out and talked. I will tell you that there is nothing for bonding like the fires of grad school. I am lifelong friends with both people in my master's and my PhD program, and it's because you're often thrown together to do projects, especially production. Some of those people, unfortunately, were submitted to my terrible production skills, and we bond over that. But yeah, you're gonna make friends at grad school that are lifelong, and I think more so than bachelor's degree.
Because so with me, I was in Massachusetts for my undergrad and moved all the way to San Francisco. So then, like I had gone straight through high school to undergrad. I actually graduated half year my senior year, so it was a 2-day period between high school and college. I graduated college the first week of August. The third week of August, I was in San Francisco for graduate. I just went all the way straight through without a break. And I was kind of like the polar opposite, though. I was so glad to finally be away from and start, like, it was like a new adventure for me. I was ready to try something new and be on my own. All my family, when I moved to California a few years later, my parents moved, or a few months later, my family moved to Arizona. So they were still kind of close, but they were still, a 3-hour flight away. And, but yeah, it was like bonding, like film school, like I was saying. All of our projects were group projects, so we were kind of all forced to work together, and we kind of bonded over that. And we're all trying to get our thesis films done at the same time, so we're all trying to, sometimes it was, like for me, I had to produce my own thesis film, but then I had to be the creative producer, so I had to go to a director that already had his going, and I had to be the producer for his project. So, and I still talk with a bunch of them. I mean, one of them was just working on the Rookie TV show with Nathan Fillion right now because she's down in LA. I have friends that are up in Toronto working in the industry. So yeah, it's just kind of you just kind of all branch out and just start networking that way. And grad school is definitely great at that. Yeah.
I know that you said that you really didn't have a break and you just kind of took it straight through. Did anybody on the panel happen to take a break between their undergrad and their graduate degree?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you speak about that experience and how it was for you? Did you jump right into the job market or starting your career first and then eventually went back to grad school? Can you share like that experience for yourself?
I'm a bad example. I graduated a semester early, and so that's why I had a break. And my lovely University of Maryland alma mater, they hired me to work as an academic advisor for 6 months. So I'm probably not the best person for this question.
I don't think I'm the best person either, because I graduated with my bachelor's degree back home in Romania. My bachelor's was in psychology, and then I moved here. And then I think a year and a half after I moved here, I started going to school for my master's, and then I took. I agree with Dr. Miller. I think it's, from my perspective, it's probably best to do it in one sitting if possible, but it might work differently for my wife. Is working towards her PhD at Indiana University right now. Well, right now, not right now, because right now she's here in Fayetteville. She's taking a break. but she's in process of getting her PhD at Indiana University. So she took a 2-year break between her master's and her the beginning of her PhD, and she found the transition quite difficult. Right? She worked during those 2 years, and then she went back to school. And I think the first semester, maybe the first whole academic year after she returned to school, was a little challenging for her. So, in my opinion, but I don't know.
I think one of the challenges is leaving school, especially graduate school. It's so intensive because they give you so much information, but on top of your normal, at least in languages, on top of your normal coursework, there was a list for your exams.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And so at the end of your master's degree and the end of your PhD, you had to take an exam to prove that you knew the kind of the standard information for that degree. And that wasn't necessarily always covered in the classes you took. And so I felt like that I had a small social life, if that makes sense, but compared to now, I spent so much more time studying outside of classes and other things that life was hard. And so I think if you take a break from studying and you're wanting to continue, you get into a more relaxed lifestyle. Your job will probably be from 8 to 5, and then the evenings you have whatever you want to do. Versus graduate school, to be able to survive, you have to take those evenings and weekends and early mornings and late nights to keep up with the material.
I will say that I think it helps with perspective to take that time off, because when I did take 2 years between my master's and my PhD, I appreciated the PhD way more. Like, I worked harder because I wanted it more. My boyfriend, who is currently at Temple getting his master's, is saying the same thing. He's kind of perplexed by the younger students around him that are not I don't know, happy taking classes. But there's not one way to do this, guys.
Exactly.
And you're gonna be fine.
Yeah.
Like, I look around and I see smart students.
Yeah.
So if you take time off to explore your other options, that's not wrong. You do that if that's what you want to do. I think you can then take those skills that you learned in the workplace and bring them to your academic career. One of the things that Temple loved about me was that I had worked in the entertainment industry. That's one of the reasons I got an assistantship there. Same thing with Syracuse. They loved my background in journalism. That's why I ended up teaching there. So sometimes those work experiences can provide you an in for assistantships as well.
Grad school is great, many joys and sorrows, right? But one thing about grad school is you're gonna be poor, right? And the problem is, if you go out in the industry and you work for 2 years and you make decent money, and then you return to poverty, that's gonna hit you a little bit,
I want to just dispel this myth that if you work in the entertainment industry, you're gonna be rich.
Well, not rich, but okay, no, that's a great
yeah,
point.
but no, you get used to a regular salary.
Yes,
and
exactly.
You're gonna have to learn some tricks.
Right.
Maybe some peanut butter dinners.
Yeah.
Ramen.
But
Lots of ramen
so I
restaurants.
was 35 when I finished my PhD, and I started working here. I'm 40 now. And so, which means that, the average life expectancy in the United States is 80, which means that I'm half dead, And so a couple of years, and you might think that, what's 2 years? I realize now that I could have finished at least 1 year early, if not 2 years earlier, right? And when you're very young, when you're 20s, a year or two, like, what's a year?
Yeah.
When you're half dead, a year is very relevant, right? So, like Dr. Miller said, there's not one way of doing it, and any other way is wrong. I wish I could have finished earlier, but sorry, Professor.
No, this is actually, I'm here because I do want to get my PhD.
Yeah.
But more importantly to Naima and Bria, whenever I finished my bachelor's at Fayetteville State, it was in 2010, and I didn't even go to get my master's until January of 2011. So I went back home to live with my mama.
Yeah.
And it was not fun because I was here for so long, and then you go back home and you're at home with your mom, and it's like, I don't really want to be here.
Right.
But what I did was I saved all my graduation money. So I always tell every student, like, save all your graduation money. And I started looking for apartments in Norfolk because I knew that's where I wanted to go. So I started looking for apartments, and I told my mom I came to live with like a portfolio. I was like, listen, I have all of these things. I know this is the apartment that I want to live in. I've already saved up for about 4 months rent. And so I had everything already set up. And I went out there and I didn't have a job. So I went out there, it was very risky, and my dad didn't like it, but I was like, I have this, I'm just gonna go out here and hopefully something great will happen, and it did. Because I started working at the Virginian Pilot. And like I told you guys before, I was making like $500 every 2 weeks, which was pretty shabby, but for me, I was like, it didn't matter. I was working and I was still in graduate school. So something will happen, but a lot of the people that I was in grad school with were doing a lot of the rooms for rent versus getting a whole apartment, but they became like your family too, because they, like they said, you're going through the same thing with them. So you do have a family with just the friends that you have in graduate school, which is really cool too. So it was not like Fayetteville State where I was itching to go home sometimes, but when I was there doing my master's degree, I was so busy that before I knew it, it was like Christmas, and I was like, oh yeah, I have a mom and a dad.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was awesome. Thank you.
Have you ever heard somebody finish their master's degree in 1 year?
Oh, I did.
Yes.
And PhD in 2 years?
3 years. I've heard a good friend of mine going to the same program, the same university, did it in 3 years, but that is very rare.
That's like summer school, that's like.
Oh yeah, plenty of, so he took classes during the summer and all that.
You would need to plan your dissertation, like,
Yeah.
like you would have to know what you were gonna write your dissertation about going in if you wanna do it. I didn't know anybody who did it in 3 years.
Mark Flynn did it in 3 years, yeah. But so some people, you may get different type of, so when I saw that he was gonna do it, in this good friend of mine, in 3 years, I approached my advisor and I asked him, do you think I should try to do the same? And he said no, because higher education is a process of slow cooking. I don't want you to he said, I don't want you to microwave your way through the PhD program. So some advisors might actually discourage you from doing that. He did it, he's great, he's a very successful professor and researcher, but that's rather the exception, I think.
Yeah, so once you're talking about PhD, a lot depends on what kind of research you want to do, who is your advisor, and all of that other stuff, because if you want, there's no way you could do a qualitative dissertation in a year. There's no way. It's not even possible, I feel like. Not one that's either qualitative interview based or definitely not ethnographic. You have to spend at least 6 months in the field. But yeah, I mean, anyway.
Yeah. I think we're approaching the end of the panel, but any questions or any other comments on the part of the panelists? Any other questions from you guys? Is there anything else that you would like to know? Well, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you for participating and your questions. Yay! All right. Thank you so much.
And if you have any questions, feel free to come by any of our offices to ask.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
That is what we are here for.
Yeah.